I believe that today's topic, where we will discuss the logic and intelligence of life, the meaning of life, is very fitting for a moment like this that we are experiencing. A moment of closing a cycle. Soon we will begin another year in our lives so that we can enter the cycle of life in a harmonious way, trusting in the fundamental essence of life. So that we do not feel overwhelmed by random factors, wronged, or burdened by countless things that drain our energy in an extraordinary way. When we conclude a year, we can reflect on what this year has taught us, what it has brought to help us grow, rather than focusing on the injustices we suffered or the misfortunes we endured, because that kind of reflection does not lead to any form of growth. So, when we trust in life, we begin to grow. We start to perceive what life sends our way as something that follows a logic that has meaning, something that is guiding us toward a destination. So, I believe this is a very fitting reflection. The end of a year is a time for reflection. It is a moment for us to take a look. What have I done with a year? I have often told you that a year is not a short time. We do not live so many of them to consider a year as little time. It is a very significant unit of our life. Therefore, we must evaluate what we have been doing with this unit of time. What changes it has brought to our lives? What adversities and difficulties we have faced, and whether we have grown from them. Because, in general, if we look at Eastern traditions, they say that what we fail to learn tends to repeat itself in our lives. Not in an identical way, but in a similar form, through events that lead us to the same point of experience. So it is more than time for us to pause for a moment. The rush, this time we set aside, well, now I'll go on vacation, I'm going to have fun, but it is also important to pause and reflect on time so that we can make better use of it. We have a new blank page ahead of us, a new opportunity, an entire year before us. May it be more human than merely useful. May we have a higher awareness, and may we continue to grow. At that moment, when looking at the photos from New Year's Eve 2024 to 2025, we can reflect and say, I'm now a more complete human being. I have grown in some way. That version of me already feels somewhat distant. It may not have been a huge transformation, but I have overcome certain things. I'm better. This will greatly help us reflect on the fact that life is not random. It is constantly communicating with us. There is an intelligence behind it. So let's have a conversation about this. Logic and the intelligence of life. So, as we were saying, let's define a bit what logic, intelligence, and life really mean. Basically, to establish a foundation, logic is the science of correct thinking. It is the science, the art of reasoning correctly and expressing oneself accurately. A person who has logic is someone whose thought process, from the very first argument, the initial premise, to the final conclusion, is completely connected. One idea leads to another. One thought emerges from the previous one, with coherence. Sometimes we stop analyzing even our own arguments, and we end up doing some rather amusing things. It starts from nowhere and arrives at nowhere, with a pile of disconnected arguments, completely disorganized. Logic is, of course, the art of reasoning correctly, the art of sound reasoning. Intelligence. What does it really mean? Intelligence is related to discernment, which fosters self-knowledge and self-control. Intelligence, etymologically, comes from inter and elege. Elege as to elect, to choose. To choose from everything presented to us, the best option. To choose, among the countless things the world suggests we should be, who we truly are. Therefore, intelligence generates identity. Intelligence fosters discernment, the ability to make good choices. And it also enhances our capacity for self-knowledge, allowing us to take greater control of our own lives. And life is a concept we understand very little about. It unfolds before us, and sometimes we become a bit dazzled by it. I remember when I was a child, placing a little bean on cotton, something everyone does as an experiment in childhood. And it was incredible to see life emerge from it. Where had all of that been hidden? Before long, the bean plant had grown much larger. Because as it grows, where was all of that hidden? How does this miracle take place? Life is something that always amazes us, always a child. When you are a mother, for example, it is impressive when we stop to see that there is another life growing inside us. It is an extraordinary, astounding miracle, even though we have often seen it happen to others. It seems astonishing when it happens to us. Life has a refinement, a capacity for perpetuation that always surprises us across all kingdoms and in all forms. Life, then, is a system that starts from an organic, elemental foundation and evolves into an immense diversity of beings. In other words, we have what we call the biosphere, an enormous multitude of living beings on this planet. We might think, wow, how ordinary, a planet full of living beings. But there is nothing ordinary about it. We have seen within our own solar system how difficult it is to have a planet capable of generating life, even in its most basic form, like a tiny bacterium. You don't find that just anywhere. In other words, life is a remarkably rare and highly intricate phenomenon. Bringing it into existence requires a complex interplay of factors. So let's talk a little more about it. Is life intelligent? I don't know if you've ever read any statistics on this. The combination of chemical elements, organic elements like carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, this combination does not follow a simple sequence. It is a sequence of successes, an immense series of correct combinations to arrive at life. Along the way, if nature had made a wrong choice, life would not have emerged. This sequence of correct choices required to form the foundation of life. Could something like this really be random? If you look at the statistical probability of life emerging without intelligence, it is millions of times more complex than the odds of winning the sports lottery, my dear. Millions of times more complex. It is a sequence of appropriate choices that nature makes, organic combinations, the formation of that primitive cell, that unicellular being, that coacervate, a multitude of options being selected. Guys, please, let's change this microphone. It sounds bad. But anyway, a series of correct choices being made. If you look at it statistically, the possibility of this happening without intelligence, purely by chance, is zero. There is a statistical analysis on this that states there isn't even a 0.00000%, 0.00000% chance of something like this occurring randomly. It seems that the place that gives rise to life possesses a specific intelligence that enables it to bring life into existence. So, statistically speaking, the probability of this happening by chance is practically zero. And as I've already mentioned to you, the greatest proof of this is the difficulty in finding life on other planets. It's elementary. People are out there searching for a single bacterium somewhere. They've never found one. In other words, any cellular organism anywhere has not been found. This is not simple. It is not simple to arrive at life. We find it, we are accustomed to it, and we think it is the most normal thing in the world. But it is not. Life is a highly intelligent and delicate process. It requires great intelligence to be developed. Continuing with our reflections, why I'm talking about all these things. Why? So that you can be certain that the universe was created intelligently. Because the possibility of this happening by chance is almost none. There is a writer who says that. The possibility of life evolving, because life always evolves into more complex systems, doesn't it? It starts with a single-celled organism and eventually develops into a human being. In other words, it always progresses toward higher levels of complexity. The likelihood of this happening by chance is the same as the probability of throwing an old computer, one of those so outdated that I don't even know if they still exist on Earth. If I throw it down a staircase, it reaches the bottom as a state-of-the-art computer. Why? Because the positions of the components changed along the way, and in the process, it somehow turned into the latest Apple model, or something like that. This might seem ridiculous to you, but the complexity of the universe is far greater than that of any Apple computer. For something like this to happen randomly, it would take a great deal of effort and credibility for us to believe in it. Statistics is a science, and even statisticians themselves don't believe in such a notion. Life evolves with intelligence. Complexity requires intelligence because complexity is not just about piling up different things. It's about fitting them together in such a way that they become increasingly functional, more and more useful, increasingly adapted to their environment. In other words, this is not simple. It is extremely complicated. It is very difficult for this to happen without intelligence at work. Life evolves from a lower level of complexity to a higher one. Professor Antonio Nobra is a Brazilian scientist. He is often criticized because he is quite bold in his statements. I even recommend that you look for this. This short statement, which he makes in a 20-minute talk, is available on the internet and discusses life. He explains that the evolution of life progresses from the simple to the complex. From the simple to the complex, always. In other words, the idea is that beings increasingly collaborate with one another, forming unity. Pay close attention, understand this. Until recently, and even today, many people still believe this, that all life evolves in a Darwinian way. What does that mean? Various different species. We observe which one is the most adapted, the one that gains an advantage, in other words, the survival of the fittest. And that one prevails. What would happen if life worked that way? If there were 10 species, only 2 would survive. It would become increasingly simpler, more and more simplified, because only the winners would remain. That was what they called the selfish gene. But now, what science tells you, and this professor explains it very well, is that we have come to realize the opposite is true when we look at the universe as a whole. Life evolves from a stage of simplicity to a stage of increasing complexity. And this complexity requires collaboration among its parts. Interestingly, he refers to this as love between the parts. Intelligent collaboration among the parts drives complexity. In other words, we have moved from the selfish gene, from selfishness as the driving force of evolution, to the altruistic union of the parts, in other words, love as the path to evolution. And I'm speaking not just of philosophy, but of science. We are arriving at these conclusions. Isn't that incredible? That's exactly how it works. Philosophy has always thought this way. That selfishness does not promote evolution at all. What truly drives evolution is altruism, is love. Today, this is scientifically proven. The foundation for mutual collaboration among parts is that nature has an inherent inclination toward love. That is what he explains in this video. It's worth checking out. I've linked it below. Antonio Donato Nobra in the Wild 2019 cycle. See how things evolve, how they change over time. Well, this logic and intelligence that operate in the construction of bodies, everything we've discussed so far pertains to the formation of bodies. Does this same force continue to act upon the soul, driving its evolution? I believe it does. This intelligent nature, which has propelled our physical bodies to such a level of complexity, continues to push the evolution of our other bodies as well. Because when you form a physical body, you create a vessel for a psychological, moral, and spiritual life that resides within this receptacle. And now evolution is no longer nature working on the body. It is the individual, each person working on themselves to achieve greater complexity and intelligence in these realms, in the psychological, moral, and spiritual planes. An increasingly greater combination of these elements, in other words, an evolution of these planes, which humanity must achieve through its own effort. Nature will no longer do this alone, but it does everything possible to facilitate it. That is, it pushes humanity forward on all levels. It does everything possible to ensure that this highly complex human consciousness continues to evolve. The body evolves without our collaboration. We do not build our own bodies. But from the moment you move toward the subtle, the construction is ours. So it depends on us. But nature still intervenes. And this is the core of what I wanted to convey to you today. Nature still plays a role in this process. It still does everything possible to push us forward. Just take a look. This is a quote from a Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius. He is a very popular figure today. Everyone knows him. Stoicism is in fashion. Marcus Aurelius was a great emperor, a Stoic, And he used to say this phrase: nothing happens to man that is not natural to man. Take a moment to reflect on the complexity of a phrase that seems so simple at first glance. If nothing happens to man that is not natural to man, then nothing happens to Lucia that is not natural to Lucia. In other words, the things that happen to me are directed toward me. They are drawn by my need for experience. Do you know what that means? Zero randomness. The things that happen to me are meant for me, to strike precisely at the rough edge I need to smooth out, to hit exactly the point I need to correct, in order to allow me to do what? To keep evolving. What does not correspond to me, I'll attract into my life. What does not correspond to me will probably not happen to me. Each person attracts the experiences and needs required for their growth, because now the drive is to grow within these specific planes. We must keep moving forward, and now it is our responsibility. So life ensures that the things meant for a person come to that person, and each person individually. The things that do not truly belong to us, let them come to us. Isn't that right? In Rome, they had a unique way of recording history, quite different from what we have today. History in Rome worked as follows. It was not so important to know the exact day a historical event took place, the time, the name of the person who played a key role in that event, who their mother or father was, where they lived. These details were somewhat irrelevant to them. For them, what truly mattered was preserving the experience that a human being had and the consequences they faced, so that it could serve as a model. If it was successful, it became a model for others to follow. If it failed, it became a model for us to avoid. In other words, history is like Magister Vitae, the teacher of life. They believed that if we preserve history, it can teach us a great deal about avoiding the same mistakes in the future. What are they trying to say with this? They're saying that history is not linear. Because if history were linear, what happened to me now would never happen again, anymore. They believe in a cyclical and reiterative history, where we often go through similar points. And those past experiences from those who have already gone through that point are very useful to us and can be reused. This applies both to our individual lives and to the collective life of humanity. We went through a religious cycle in the Middle Ages. Will humanity never go through another one? It is very likely that it will. It is very likely that humanity will go through it again. In one of our study booklets, the first level course booklet, which everyone is invited to explore, we include an example from Professor Jorge Angel Livraga Rizzi, who founded Nova Acropolis. He presents an example that I find wonderful. He says, ask a Roman man what he thinks will be happening 500 years from now. He would say, well, there must be chariots pulled by 100 horses, because having a beautiful chariot was a symbol of status. So 500 years from now, there will be chariots pulled by 100 horses. Was anyone in the Middle Ages concerned about chariots pulled by 100 horses? That was of no interest to anyone. Then you take a medieval person. What will happen 500 or even 1,000 years from now? It depends on which point of the Middle Ages you consider. No, 500 years from then, there would be cathedrals 1,000 meters tall, because what they wanted were cathedrals so high, the so-called Gothic ones, that they would reach the heavens. So the cathedrals would be even taller 500 years later. Is anyone in the modern age trying to build a cathedral that touches the sky? Is anyone thinking about that? No one. This is something we should learn from, but we haven't. Because if you take a person today and ask them, what will the world be like in 500 years? They will say, a hyper-technological society. We will be living like the Jetsons, flying everywhere, with robots doing everything for us. Isn't that what everyone thinks? But will anyone still value that 500 years from now? History is not linear. It moves in cycles. We return to the same points multiple times, which is why we learn from the past. History has the wisdom to align itself with nature, bringing about similar phases, so that the lessons of the past help us better navigate the present and the future. So in Rome, they had this understanding that history was the teacher of life. You don't study history just to know what happened. You study history to understand how to deal with what is happening now and what is yet to come. In other words, a perspective on history that is more focused on the future, rather than simply memorizing what happened in the past. And all of this assumes an intelligent nature, one that cycles and offers us opportunities to experience the same events in a more refined way. This is the doctrine of eternal return, where we continuously revisit similar points. Perhaps in the future, we will face a great decline, losing all this technology. Don't think that this is impossible. There was a lot of technology in antiquity, and the Middle Ages destroyed it all. Perhaps we will return to a more primitive civilization. Maybe we'll go through another highly religious era. We don't know what the future holds, but it certainly doesn't always move upward, simply repeating the same experience. That's not what we observe throughout history. Well, what else do we have to look at here? Life, as we mentioned, weaves circumstances for evolution, so to speak. It tries, in some way, it cannot create our spiritual life, our psychological life, our moral life, but it can generate circumstances that help you work on these aspects, allowing you to grow as quickly as possible. So it creates a setting to help you evolve. And what is this setting? Trials, adversities. We have a human pedagogy in which we send our children to school to study and then take tests. Isn't that right? And we know that if the school doesn't give tests, we take the child out of there because we understand that they won't learn anything. Because the moment they make an effort to absorb the lesson is when there's a test tomorrow. Otherwise, they will never truly absorb anything. They will never study it, never truly know it. We understand that human beings need this little push to truly learn things. So we send our children to school to take tests. But when the tests happen in our own lives, we don't like it. We wish they didn't exist. But if there were no tests, we wouldn't move forward. There would be no expansion of consciousness, no growth. From time to time, something must shake us out of our inertia and force us to take another step forward, to go even further. That's why we say that adversities are tests. It's very interesting to understand this because it allows us to see things from a completely different perspective. One thing is for something to happen to me, and I believe it was just a coincidence. I'll feel wronged. Why did this happen to me? Why didn't it happen to someone else? It's entirely different to understand that this was directed at me specifically with a clear purpose. Because I needed to go through this experience. It becomes much easier to process and deal with it when we recognize it as a test. I always use a simple example, but I'll use it for you because it helps illustrate this concept well. Let's say she hasn't arrived in class yet, but we know she's on her way. So we make an agreement among ourselves. Let's say we randomly select someone to summarize everything that has been discussed in the lecture up to this point, and her name is chosen. When she walks in, we give her this news, just to see if she has emotional balance. Let's see how she reacts. Then she walks in, we give her the news, and she will be outraged. How could you do this to me? This is so unfair. Why did something like this happen to me? Isn't that right? Now, if she were outside and overheard our plan and knew what we were doing, just to test her emotional balance, wouldn't that be easier? She would walk in and say, "Look, I'll sum up everything that was said in a single phrase from the philosopher Socrates. I only know that I know nothing. Good night, goodbye." Isn't it easier to see justice because it's a test? It's much easier. There is intelligence in the process. We know it's for our own good, that no one is trying to bring us down, but rather that someone is trying to uplift us. It's much easier. Therefore, one of the fundamental things that drive human consciousness to evolve is viewing adversities as tests. And understanding that on the other side, there is something better to be achieved, if he overcomes it in a favorable way. So the schoolboy knows that after the tests come the second grade, then the third grade, in other words, those challenges are there to help him grow. We should also understand this with absolute certainty. It lessens the feeling of injustice, and we come to understand something very important. Tests are not punishments for the past, they are opportunities for the future. You stay there repeating, mea culpa, mea, to the fullest. Guilt, I am suffering this, but why? I must have done something in the past. I must have treated someone badly. I must have committed some wrongdoing, and that's why I'm here paying for it, so I have to suffer. No, this is not revenge for something you did. This is an opportunity for you to do something. Life puts pressure on you precisely because it knows that at this moment, you are capable of making a leap forward. Because if life thought you couldn't make the leap, it wouldn't put pressure on you. Problems cannot be greater than people. Problems always give us a chance and trust that we'll be capable of overcoming them. If I throw a ball at you and it's too high, it won't hit you, it will pass over you. If it hit you, it's because it was the right size for you. Do you understand? So, the problem that affects us is because it is the right size for us, and we can overcome it. This is the best way to face challenges. It is not a punishment for the past, it is an opportunity for the future. Responding correctly to these challenges elevates us to a new level of maturity and fulfillment. This is what I advise you to say in the face of challenges, to say to circumstances, to adversities, that I will only come out on the other side greater than when I entered. Because otherwise, it wouldn't be fair if I go through all this suffering and don't grow at all. I've taken a loss. So may I only come out on the other side greater than when I entered, so that it is worth it, because that way you balance the equation. Do you understand? I suffered so much, but I grew so much. It was a fair price. It was worth it. For the growth I achieved, it was worth it. We can already make the synthesis now. If you take a moment to reflect, thanks to what am I? I'm what I am. The awareness I have, the principles I uphold, the level of knowledge I possess, thanks to what? The favorable things that happened to us were difficult. Far more the difficulties, much more. Notice something interesting. When something very good happens, we don't become reflective, you become euphoric. We don't stop to reflect on victory. But when we face a defeat, then we ask ourselves, where did I go wrong? What was the problem? And precisely because of that, it is the moment when we grow the most. When you understand this, I paid X, but I received Y and both are equivalent. I settle my accounts with the past. Now is a good time, a new year, to settle accounts with the past, to leave the year 2024 fully accounted for. Such suffering. I went through it, but I learned something valuable. Therefore, it was worth it. That's why it's important for us to always face adversities and difficulties with this mindset. You came to make me grow, and I'll grow, because I will only come out on the other side greater than when I entered. And in this way, you settle your accounts with the past. And you can move forward into the future carrying only the essence of the experience, not the bitterness of it. This is fundamental. I always illustrate this with the story of orange juice. You have a cold. Then you hear that vitamin C, ascorbic acid, is good for colds. So you squeeze several oranges and make juice. You drink the juice. The vitamin C is absorbed into your body and continues with you. But the orange peels you throw away. The pulp of the orange you throw away. Imagine if I didn't do that, if I put everything into a bag and walked around dragging it through La Dampera. Then people would say, wow, you're really resistant to colds, aren't you? I am, but look at what it cost me. Isn't it like that? We are more or less like that. Wow, you really know how to overcome adversity, don't you? Yeah, but let me tell you what I went through to get here. And blah, and blah, and blah, and blah. Do you know what's happening? You're dragging a bag full of peels through La Dampera. We should absorb what the juice has given us and move forward with that. And the cost of it should be left behind. That is the right way to learn from challenges. I don't carry bitterness, I carry learning. The rest I leave behind. There are certain things we truly need to let go of. Forgetting isn't so bad after all. Some things really need to be left behind and forgotten. It's a waste of time, a waste of emotional and mental space. Holding on to how much you paid for things, that is a waste of energy of life. And life is too important for us to waste. Predictability of challenges. Now, this is a challenge I'll give you. Let's see if you can do it. If you manage to, you'll find it very interesting. Do you know what the challenge is? If you could, right now, at this very moment, make a list of your main flaws if you were able to see them, because we are really bad at recognizing our own flaws, and that's no joke. If I were able to make a list of my flaws, I could imagine what experiences would happen to a person with those flaws in order to help them overcome them. And maybe you could even anticipate some things about the future. Do you understand? It's as if you were playing God. This person has these and these and these flaws. What experience I'll give them to help them overcome this point, this point, this point, and this point. Then you imagine what kind of trials you might have to go through in the future. It gives a certain level of predictability. The only problem with this exercise is that we can never truly know what our flaws are. That's the problem. We just can't, no matter what. I've done this exercise many times with students. You ask them what their biggest flaw is, what their greatest quality is, which, in general, I always ask. They state their worst flaw. Then they say their best quality. That person who always arrives in the middle of class, late, says their best quality is punctuality. Everything is reversed. Everyone bursts into laughter. This happens all the time. We don't see ourselves clearly. I often joke with my students that the doorman of our building knows us better than we know ourselves. It would be a good idea to disguise yourself and go ask him what the resident of the mental altar is like. Because through our actions, through the traces we leave behind, he sees many things that we ourselves do not see. By their deeds, you shall know them. If we had the clarity to truly recognize our greatest flaws, playing a little at being God, we would be able to foresee what lies ahead, what kind of trials are coming our way, because they will come precisely to strike at those sharp edges. And the same applies here. We can do the same reflection regarding the past. The same with the past. What kind of human being needed to go through that experience? For example, a person who suddenly lost all their wealth, or someone who unexpectedly fell into complete anonymity. What kind of person would go through this type of experience? Take a moment to imagine an experience where someone who once had a certain level of fame suddenly fell into complete anonymity. What kind of flaw would such an experience be confronting? Vanity, pride willed it? Absolutely. Or do you not think this is an effective way? Against vanity, against pride. So if we reflect on the trials we've been through, we begin to see ourselves. Look, this trial is meant for a person like this, but in like this. Yes, indeed, my friend. Because your trials know more about you than you do yourself. So take a look at the past and imagine, let's play God for a moment. Who would I send these trials to? For what kind of person? For what kind of profile? We can really imagine it well. This is quite interesting. If we believe that life has logic, if we believe that life has logic, we can solve many enigmas, many mysteries. You can't even imagine. As we connect the dots, we begin to understand many things because we believe that everything has meaning. It's like a bunch of strange words written on a page. I tell you, this is not just an invention. This is a language. If you learn to speak it, it's an interesting and complex language, and you can communicate with it. How do you know that it has logic? Because it's a language. You will start to find connections between those words. If you thought it was random, you wouldn't even look for them. You would think it's nonsense, just a bunch of graphic symbols scattered randomly. Therefore, trusting that life is logic gives you a much greater ability to engage with it, converse with it, and extract many answers about ourselves, about what was and what will be. Many answers, simply by knowing that life is guided by a thread of intelligence that runs through all things. Another thing Carl Jung used to say, and he was right, is that the conflicts that arise in our lives. Jung used to say, if you don't like it, argue with him, not with me. He said that many times the conflicts we experience are actually elements within us that we don't know how to handle, so life externalizes them to force you to deal with them. So if you are a very impatient person and don't realize it, but you are, it is likely that life will bring people into your life who, what? Very slow, who do things at a very slow pace. She is trying to contradict me. No, poor thing. They are just slow because that's the best they have managed to be so far. But they entered your life because you called them my friend. Doesn't that make sense? It makes perfect sense. If you're impatient, then all the turtles in the universe will appear. In other words, external conflicts, according to him, are what he calls the theory of projection. External conflicts are a projection of internal conflicts, conflicts that you haven't resolved. If you haven't resolved them, then take control of your patience, practice it. Work on developing this much needed patience. This is a sign pointing in that direction. How do I know? Because I have read life. This is extremely important. What else do we have here? Jung is synchronicity. Once again, Carl Jung and one of his concepts, which I have even given a lecture on before. Synchronicity suggests that two or more events can coincide in a meaningful way for those who experience them. You have probably witnessed synchronicity happen at some point. Some instances are truly incredible. Let me try to share with you an example from my own life. I wanted to leave Brasilia to establish new Acropolis in another state. But I had a specific region in mind. And that particular region, I couldn't get a transfer there, no matter what I tried. Then they suggested that I go to Manaus. And I started wondering, could it really be Manaus? But why Manaus? Suddenly, a truck cuts me off, and written on it, there was a colorful parrot with the words New Amazon. Really, really, I have witnessed some incredible things. Sometimes you find yourself thinking, reflecting on a problem, wondering, is this really what life is about? Could this situation be trying to teach me something? You are walking along, and suddenly, from the other side, an elderly man jogging passes by you. And he says, that's it, that's exactly it. Jung tells an incredible story. He says that he was with a patient in a certain building, and this patient was sharing the difficulties he was going through. And he was telling him about the myth of the scarab beetle, the Egyptian beetle. The scarab beetle is a creature that crawls along like a beetle, but then suddenly discovers it has wings and takes flight. And this myth is closely associated with the human experience. And he said that he was talking about this. And as the patient was listening, suddenly on that floor where he lived, these insects don't usually fly high in that floor. Where he had his office, a scarab beetle flew in and hit the wall between them. He doesn't lie. He wouldn't make up something like that. Aren't there some things that are just incredible? Incredible. Something very interesting was about to happen there. In short, synchronicity. These are elements that mutually attract each other. One exists to confirm the other. And why do they attract each other? Because there is a law of attraction at work, guided by nature, to help you see your path. Sometimes we don't notice it because these things are very subtle. If we take a moment to observe, there are simultaneous elements that seem unrelated, but one clearly reinforces the other, as if indicating whether the first one is the right or wrong path. Jung worked extensively with this idea of synchronicities. In other words, a way of pointing out whether the path you have chosen, what you are reflecting on, holds some truth or not, whether or not it has a purpose. In other words, your personal power, the laws of nature, the intelligence of nature, create this coincidence of factors as a form of confirmation bias for something you need at that moment. Another thing we can clearly perceive: the intelligence of life. Ask it questions. Ask questions. However, there is an element to this, a rule. Don't ask questions. Should I dye my hair red or yellow? It will not answer you. Bio. I don't know. Which dress? Which outfit should I buy? It will not answer you. When you ask questions that are fundamental in determining the direction you will take in life, in general, the answers come. You have to pay attention to how it responds to you, because it uses symbols to communicate. And sometimes it creates incredible synchronicities. So truly focus, ask life a question, and watch as it moves to bring you answers. If you stay attentive and ask a truly important question, you'll see that the answer comes in some symbolic form, which you must learn to interpret. Then, you realize there comes a certain moment when you become curious to see who is behind the scenes of life, communicating with you through this language, which is symbolism. You perceive such a clear intelligence that it cannot be mere coincidence. An intelligence so evident in the sequence of events, revealing exactly the kind of human being that nature wants you to become. And therefore, it is pushing you in that direction. A sequence of events that will help you smooth out certain edges, that will lead you to create within yourself a new human being. It believes in us more than we believe in ourselves. It believes that we can be more than what we are. And until the very last moment, it believes that we can grow. Does it give up on us? Never. So, the way I'll go to challenges is a kind of dialogue with life. The more you engage, the more you perceive this intelligence. There is no one watching over you, orchestrating things to convince you. These are situations where it's just you and life. And you start noticing the sequence of events that bring answers to you. And you say, it's impossible for life to be random. It's just not possible. There is intelligence in this sequence of events. There is something orchestrating my growth. There is something that wants to push me forward. And when we are too inert, sometimes being pushed hurts, it wounds, it bothers us. We say, this is bad. But it was the only chance we had to move forward. We think this is bad, this is unpleasant, because we are so comfortable that we'll see something to keep us in our armchair. Then life comes along and flips your armchair over, and you land on the floor. How cruel life is. Why does it hurt me so much? No, it wants you to walk. And we'll see here for that. We did not come here to sit in comfortable armchairs, simply to survive in the most pleasurable way possible. We came here to grow as human beings. And life does not give up on that. It expects you to meet its expectations, which is the expectation of a true human being, one who fulfills their role in the world. In other words, one who brings values, virtues, and wisdom to the world. We'll see here for that. And the world needs this. It needs us to build this bridge and bring these values into the world. So, life will truly push you forward. And it is not always pleasant, sometimes it is painful. But even so, it is like a mother who lets her child take a few falls to learn how to walk, because otherwise they will never walk. It is the same technique. Knowing how to ask questions, waiting for the answers, positioning yourself in a way that encourages the desired outcomes. If they don't come, analyze where you went wrong. What expectation did you have that was not aligned with reality? I thought I was supposed to go that way, but in reality, I needed to go this way. In other words, you begin to unravel the symbols that life presents to you. Engage in a dialogue with life. Its language is symbolism. Learn to speak this language. The reward for overcoming trials well is wisdom. May one become a true sage. This ideal that we imagine, that we think does not exist in today's world, I believe there must be someone hidden away, unrecognized. In today's society, it seems that those who gain recognition are often the most ignorant, rather than the wisest. So, being wise does not grant any status at all. We will not recognize them. But the wise person is precisely this archetype of a citizen, someone who has successfully overcome trials and speaks fluently the language of life. They understand what life expects from them and respond accordingly. This is a concept of happiness that I deeply appreciate. Do you know what it would be? Human happiness. It is when the values of nature manifest in the world through us. You realize, look at the benefit I have brought to the world. Look at the beautiful thing I have contributed to the world. Happiness. I fulfilled my role. I was a bridge between heaven and earth. Life, nature expressed itself through me. I brought values into the world through myself. In other words, I did not exist in vain. That is happiness, a moment of profound joy. It means that I fulfilled the role expected of a human being. The most beautiful things in the universe, the most magnificent ideas, came into the world through me. When you witness truly beautiful things in the world, perhaps a breathtaking melody, a magnificent painting, you can be certain that the person behind it was a good bridge between realms. Beautiful things exist in the realm of ideas, as Plato would say. And to move from the realm of ideas to the concrete world, it needs a proper bridge. A person pure and humble enough to bring them forth, to have their head in the heavens and their feet on the earth, and to bring these ideas down to the world. Therefore, the world has them thanks to that person. Thanks to the existence of each of us, things come into the world that would not have arrived through any other channel. We exist for this. That is our purpose. This is a state of great happiness. In other words, the wise person has a highly intelligent interaction with life. They speak its language. Another important point is accepting that there are things we are not yet ready to understand. One day we will be. Why do I not understand certain things that happen? It is not because they lack logic, but because you do not yet have the necessary elements to comprehend them. Perhaps at some point you will understand. Maybe you do not yet have the necessary knowledge to comprehend more complex situations. One day you will. So I brought you this example about a dog, something that happened to me and that I found very meaningful. A very simple story. We were in the middle of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, so many people wrote to me asking why God had allowed COVID to happen. As if I had a direct hotline to God. The number of people asking me that was incredible. One day at home, and I have a lot of pets because I really love animals. One of my little dogs. I have brooms hanging on the wall like this. One of my little dogs managed to pull a broom down and was making a huge mess with it, tossing it around with her mouth, throwing it from one side to the other. So I went over, scolded her, took the broom from her, and hung it back up on the wall again. When I'll go to her, her little face was slightly tilted. She was pure curiosity. As if she were saying, these humans are crazy. What difference does it make whether that thing is on the wall or here with me so I can play? That was written all over her little face. Then I stopped to think even if I spoke her language, I wouldn't be able to explain. Because there are certain concepts such as beauty, harmony, justice, which is giving each person what is due to them, that she does not know. Yet, and so even if I wanted to explain, she wouldn't have the means to understand. She needs to grow more to reach the point where she can understand. Then, suddenly, there was a click in my mind. Isn't it the same with human beings? We constantly seek answers. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? But it's no use, even if someone had a direct line to God. We would need to have a certain level of maturity, which we don't yet possess. We would need a basic understanding of ourselves and of life, which we have yet to attain. So grow as a human being, evolve, and perhaps at some point you will unravel this mystery. Maybe one day you will come to understand a complex question like this. At this moment, if we understand anything about life, we should consider ourselves fortunate, because this is not the time when we are educated to understand life. We are trained to be technically skilled, not to be virtuous as human beings. Our education system does not take on the responsibility of teaching this kind of thing. Therefore, if we awaken to philosophy, begin to reason, and manage to unravel some of life's mysteries, it is a remarkable achievement in our historical time. Because today, we are terrible at understanding symbolism. We take everything literally. We do not speak the language of life. And we have very little depth in our current historical moment. Very little depth. So we must accept that for a time, we will understand some things, while others, more complex, will remain beyond our grasp. But we must trust that if the simple things have explanations, the complex ones will too. And the moment will come when we will understand the missing piece of this puzzle. Everything I have wanted to understand so far, or at least a great part of it, I have managed to grasp. So there are certain things that nature still tells us. Not yet. I also trust that the answer will come at the right moment. Remember that the purpose of life is growth. In our case, humanization. And life will use all the tools at its disposal to push you in that direction. So the purpose of life is growth. I have no doubt about that. Well, see here for what? Just to take a stroll through the world and enjoy ourselves. Look, the world is tough. If you came here just to enjoy yourself, it's difficult because 90% of the time is a struggle. So, you came to the wrong place. Isn't that right? So, what did we come here to do? After all, I have no doubt. Wealthy grow. Wealthy here to become more dignified human beings worthy of the human condition. Wealthy here to leave greater than when we arrived. To make a difference, as I always say, to be a force for good, to leave the world a little better than the one we found, to leave a little greater than we were. When we arrived, wealthy to grow. This is a fundamental principle that, if you look at any Eastern tradition and even ancient Western philosophy, is unquestionable human beings came into the world to grow. If the purpose of life is growth in our case, humanization in life will use all the tools at its disposal to push you in what direction? Towards growth, towards becoming a more complete human being each time. More faithful to concepts such as kindness, justice, fraternity, and empathy. Life will push you in that direction, and it will push even harder in the areas where you're most lacking. Where you are most deficient is exactly where life will push you the hardest. And make no mistake, it is life's role to push. Do not expect anything different. Life cannot build great wisdom within you because free will does not allow for that. You must achieve it on your own. That giving you a push at, life is allowed to do. And it pushes with determination. It pushes with great enthusiasm. So, the direction in which we are pushed should also tell us something about the intelligence of life. It should prepare us to decipher a bit of this riddle, this puzzle that is life. To realize that there is logic in this, that it is not chaos as it may seem there is meaning in it. If I do not need a certain experience or trial, how can I prevent it from happening? There was a great philosopher from the past who was speaking with one of his disciples, and his disciple asked him a question. But master, imagine this. Every day I walk the same path. One day, someone hides at the top of a mountain, behind a hill, behind a mountain, with a bow and arrow, waiting for me to pass that way to shoot an arrow at me. How can I avoid such an experience if I do not deserve it? How I'll avoid it? If I see nothing, if I have no control over it, how can I avoid such an experience? If it does not concern me, it's simple. For some reason, on that day, you will not pass that way.
Do you understand?
For some reason, on that day, you will not take that path. And life has these surprising moments. You want to go one way, and it truly pushes you in the opposite direction. And you don't understand what just happened. The bridge collapsed. There was a traffic jam. Because if something is not meant for you to go there, you may go every day, but today you won't. In other words, if that experience is not meant for you on that day, you will not be there. You won't pass through there. Do you notice the refinement in his response? How much he considered life to be intelligent. We're used to seeing things like this. That person who is always punctual, but on that particular day, they missed that flight. Haven't you seen this happen before? And that very plane ends up in a serious accident. They thought they were supposed to be in that place. And for some reason, beyond their control, some event in life prevented them from being there. And then something happens, there's something that the people present needed to witness, but not them. So life sometimes closes certain doors on us. It redirects you, wait, go this way, because this path is not what is meant for you right now. And likewise, if there is something you need to experience, life will push you toward it. In other words, life sometimes cuts us off, redirects us to place us on the path that truly belongs to us. And many times we suffer these redirections, these abrupt changes, and we think it was just coincidence, even after knowing what happened there. We still believe it was just chance. We'll talk about this shortly in the context of the past. Back then, they called this the theoretical foundations of history. I will explain this in just a moment. If we'll walk freely toward our ideal, we avoid life's pushes and bitter remedies. In other words, if we move in the right direction, if we have the awareness to recognize the virtues we need to develop and willingly walk that path, then nature does not need to push us. If nature is pushing you, It's because you're not walking in the right direction. And that brings us to history, to the theoretical foundations. Let's imagine the history of humanity as a whole. Everyone in Troy used to say that in a few decades, maybe even less, Troy would become the greatest city of antiquity. It had everything for that to happen. It had everything for that to happen. You know that today, science has confirmed that Troy really existed. An archaeological pyramid has already been found at the site in Troy. In other words, everyone living there believed that Troy would become the greatest city in the world. But for some reason, it was not meant to be. So what happened? À Certany de Prince, Paris, a womanizer who had all the women in the world at his disposal, decided to get involved with, do you know who? With the wife of the king of Sparta, my friend. Talk about stirring up trouble in Troy. The wife of the king of Sparta, Menelaus, goes right into the heart of the conflict. So what happens next? All of Greece, which was already looking for an excuse to destroy Troy, arms itself and marches against the city. And thus begins that historic conflict. And from this historic conflict emerges a new force, a civilization that, in a few years, will come to dominate history Rome. Rome is, in a way, like the offspring of these two. It carries traits from both its parents. It inherits the warrior spirit of Troy, but also the philosophical depth of Greece. This clash gave birth to a civilization that was destined to become the foundation of the West, rather than Troy. Then nature intervenes, and oof, it employs this invisible hand, which we call a theoretical foundation. In this case, a theoretical foundation of a sexual nature. In other words, a Paris who existed in history solely to create this turmoil, nothing more. He good at. But he served a purpose. His weaknesses, his shortcomings, became tools that allowed history to move in the right direction. Conflicts of all kinds, geographical factors, sometimes a place dries up, a people leave one land and move to another, and in that new place where they settle, there is a neighboring people who do not accept them, leading to conflict. In other words, factors of all kinds of factors. Nature uses them to push you in the right direction. It does this collectively throughout history. If you look at human history, there are moments when you think, a continuation of this will lead here. No. Suddenly, when you reflect, you don't even know how you got here. It's something entirely different. It's not the previous projection that unfolds. Something completely unprecedented happens. What exactly happened there? A political theoretical foundation, a conflict between one people and another, an ethnic theoretical foundation of people beginning to discriminate against another due to racial or linguistic reasons. This has happened throughout history. And then, suddenly, one thing was expected to happen, but something entirely different took place. In other words, history uses these factors to steer humanity in the direction it needs to go. And it is probably doing the same in your life as well. Most likely, I have already experienced an interference of theoretical factors, which was very interesting, very curious. I was supposed to go to Manaus, as I have already told you the story, to establish new Acropolis there. And since I worked in a public service position, there was someone from Manaus who wanted to come, and I would take their place. So I packed my suitcase and got ready to go. Sold my belongings. I carried what I needed to take and went to Manaus. When I got there, the person who was supposed to come to Brasilia had reconciled with her husband and no longer wanted to leave Manaus. That was it. So I had to look at the map of Brazil for some place where I had a chance of finding a position. And I ended up in João Pessoa, a city I didn't even know. And it was a place that greatly needed a school of philosophy. The school grew quickly. That was where I was meant to be. But Neve, if I had left Brasilia with all my baggage and someone had told me, you're going to João Pessoa, I would have said, you must be crazy. What am I going to do in João Pessoa? I don't even know where that is. No, Elle went. And then poof. Theoretical foundations are like an invisible hand of history, pushing you in the direction you need to go. And sometimes it's something absolutely unpredictable. It's yet another demonstration of nature's intelligence. It happens to humanity as a whole, and it happens in individual cases. There are no greater proofs than one another. Being human, life brings the right people onto our path. In other words, nature presents us with challenges so we can grow. What are the greatest challenges? The ones that destroy? Coexistence. Isn't that right? Where do you expect the greatest challenges to come from? From inanimate objects? From your dog? From a little plant? No. From a human being. That is the greatest challenge of all. Human beings are social by nature. So it's quite a funny thing, because a person can't live without others, but also struggles to live with them. So our greatest challenges come from there, without a doubt. I was just telling you one example, and there's another that is truly historical. It really happened. A student once came to me and said, "Professor, I work in a place where, unbelievably, there are 20 annoying people working with me. How did I end up in a place like that?" So I told him exactly this. Life is trying to tell you something. Either you need to develop more patience, or maybe the annoying one is you. Now, they are not trying to persecute you. They were just living their lives as annoying people, but they came into your life because you attracted them. You held a public exam for annoying people, and these were the ones who passed. Do you understand this? So, people are often used as tests for one another. Sometimes we enter someone's life to be a test for them, and they become a test for us. These connections happen in such a way that when you realize that person came into your life and you grew because of it, then nature has fulfilled its purpose. Now, if you avoided the experience, transfer to another department to escape working with all those annoying people, ran away from it, changed jobs. You fled from the experience, but it will catch up with you at some point. It has to catch up with you because nature does not take leaps. Then you will have to overcome it. Something equivalent, not identical, but equivalent will come at some point in the future. That is the problem with running away from challenges. They will be waiting for you at the next corner. There is no way around it. Life sees our potential better than we do ourselves. Life believes in us as grand beings, extremely wise beings, extremely kind, with an incredible capacity for collaboration among ourselves. Remember what Dr. Antonio Nobre said: life evolves from simplicity to complexity, and complexity is the result of collaboration. Beings collaborate with one another and create increasingly harmonious systems. Life believes in us as harmonious beings, one helping the other to grow, driving humanity as a whole to evolve. It believes that we are capable of this. And she's a bit stubborn. No one can get that out of her head. It believes that we are made for this. Just as a plant is made to perform photosynthesis, and it does so without needing to be pushed. An animal is made to follow its instincts, and it does so without needing to be pushed. Now, humans are more complicated because they have free will. They only evolve if they choose to. It is in nature's way to give a little push to help. But it believes that we can achieve such a harmonious way of living, that we can reach such a high level of consciousness, to become truly human in this way. And the fact that it believes in us is an honor, because who are we to doubt if it believes? Who are we to doubt? It sees in us a potential for greatness that we, in general, do not see. So knowing this gives us great motivation to grow. Someone deeply believes in us. And that is why it is pushing us forward. It knows that there is a path ahead, and we have the ability to walk it. Trust in yourself. Trust in life. This is essentially a summary of our talk today. Everything we discussed was meant to help you leave here with a broader perspective, a clearer understanding of this simple truth. You are part of a highly intelligent system that gives each person exactly what corresponds to them. This is Plato's concept of justice. A tremendously intelligent nature that orchestrates everything so that all beings may grow. Trust in life and trust in yourself. When life suggests that you can move in a certain direction, it is because you truly can. When it suggests that you can achieve something, it is because you are capable of doing so. Believe in it. Trust in yourself and trust in life. Then you will reach what I am presenting here. This ability to rest in the arms of the Father, as if in a refuge. In other words, I know that I'm in a fully harmonious universe, that the things that come to me are meant for me, so I do not feel adrift in emptiness. I feel as though I am resting in the arms of the Father. That is, in an immensely intelligent universe. It orchestrates my growth and evolution. And that is essentially what happens. We are living in a historical moment of great skepticism where we no longer believe in this. It is difficult to find a past generation that would believe, for example, in Rome, that you could say, what happened 10 years ago was mere chance. They would die from there. They would process that experience, believing that the gods had sent it for them to learn something. No one believed it was random. I don't know how we ended up in this mindset, where suddenly we stopped understanding life and started seeing it as chaos. None of these great civilizations of the past believed that what they had experienced was mere chance. They always understood it as an experience meant to help them grow. And yet, we live in such a materialistic, superficial, and trivial cycle. We have lost the ability to become literate in the language of life and interact with it intelligently, to take advantage of the way life supports us and strive to respond to the impulses it gives us.